Welcome to RH at Home. I'm Chad Clement, pastor at Redemption Hill Church, and we're excited that you're joining us today as we continue our journey, our walk through the book of Matthew. This morning, if you have your Bibles, and I hope that you do, we're going to look at the first 15 verses of Matthew chapter 10. And just to kind of get us set up with where we're at, being it's been a week or two, and I was off last week on vacation. Man, I'm so thankful for the faith family that we have, the people who stepped up and made it possible, excuse me, for Court and I and the kids to get away for a few days and all. But the last time that I spoke, we looked at the last part of Matthew chapter 9, and really just a few verses in Matthew chapter 9, verses 36 through 38. Let me start with rereading that as our springboard into today's message of Matthew 10, 1 through 15. But going back to Matthew chapter 9, it says, "And Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd." And remember last time we talked about that idea of the sheep without shepherd, really that's a knock on the religious leadership of Jesus' day. That most of those Pharisees, those scribes, had not drawn the attention towards Jesus, but rather they were the ones that were trying to dampen him. They were the ones that were trying to blot him out. Like they were the ones trying to get rid of Jesus. And so the result was all these people that had a heritage of sorts of faith, like their background was they should be this way, but the result of poor leadership was there were these sheep that were just scattered abroad, that had nowhere to go, had no one to protect them, had no one to provide for them, no one to look out for them. And so Jesus goes in verse 37, so it says to his disciples. Now this is a general, when he says here the disciples, this is a general, like, disciples, followers of Christ, those who are gathered around him, those who were with him, okay? This isn't specific to the disciples, the 12 that we're going to read about today. This is, again, a general group of people who were following or had been following Jesus. And he says to them, verse 37 and 38 says, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." And so, as we've looked, coming out of the Sermon on the Mount, in chapter 8 and chapter 9, Jesus has been all over the place. He's done all sorts of miracles. He's done all these teachings. His ministry is growing. The crowds are growing. It's exhausting, really, when you read chapter 8 and 9, you realize like this takes place in a very, very short period of time. It's exhausting, right? And so Jesus looks around, full of compassion, full of grace, full of mercy, realizing, and seeing the great need, tells those who are following him to pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest. Letting them know that the harvest was plentiful, but the laborers were few. So to pray that the Lord would send out laborers. Right? And that's really important. So the group that's there, that's following, the disciples that were following Jesus, those followers of Jesus, began to pray that the Lord of the harvest, or God, would send out laborers. It's interesting, though, because as we're about to see, that oftentimes the answers to those prayers come through the ones who are praying. So in Matthew chapter 10, I'm going to read the first 4 verses for us today as we start. It says, and he called to his 12 disciples, and he called to him his 12 disciples, and he gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction. And the names of the 12 apostles are these: first, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, the or who betrayed him. And so here we see this special calling now. Now here Jesus identifies 12, his 12 disciples, the ones that would oftentimes when we see that word disciple, maybe your mind goes towards them. All right, and so Jesus has this calling now. Now these 12 were picked out of that group of people who have been following Jesus for a while now. You know, they had sat underneath him and they'd learned from him. And there's a couple different things that are interesting in this. And as we begin to kind of dig into this passage, I want us to be really careful. At Redemption Church, we are big sticklers for context. That's why we typically go verse by verse through books of the Bible to keep us within what's going on. We rarely jump out and just start doing a bunch of topical things and just grabbing a verse from here or there and bouncing around. We believe context is critical. All right? So with that being said, what we have to understand is this. The context of what we're going to read in chapter 10, really all of chapter 10, is Jesus is going to, and ultimately he's going to call 12 specific men for a specific ministry. He's going to give those 12 men some special authority, special power. He's going to give them a unique mission. All right, but what we're going to see here is specific to them. Now, within that, understand that we can, I believe, pull out principles and applications to us in the 21st century. But realize and understand that this is somewhat unique. Like this stuff that we're reading about here is really specific to those 12. And the other thing I see is interesting is this. I love the progression of this. Because you have a group of people who are followers. Right there, you have a group of people who believe Jesus, who were there, who were attending, would attend, would go to things. But within that, Jesus also saw this other group that was deeper than just those who would show up, who would come and would attend. And in that, he identifies those as disciples. And now here's what I think we begin to see in this transition. Is there a lot of people who might claim to believe in Jesus, right? That might say they're Christians, they believe in Jesus, but not every Christian is a disciple. All right, now every disciple is a Christian, right? But there's this progression. Like that disciple is going beyond just bearing a title, bearing a name, or they've gone beyond just being inquisitive. They've gone beyond just kind of showing up here or there. All right? They've taken steps. They're growing. Their faith is growing. Their knowledge in the Lord is growing. There's this appetite within them to follow, to put into practice the things that they've learned. All right, so there's that progression. So not all Christians or not all believers are disciples. Okay, that idea of disciples is taking that next step. It's growing. It's active. It's an active relationship with Jesus, right? And they're growing in that. And then we also see but within that, these 12 are given a special title. They're called apostles. All right, they're going to be given a distinct call by the Lord, right? A direct call, like Jesus himself, face to face, is going to call these 12 apostles to his mission. Very unique. Like we live in a day and age where and not just now, all throughout history, where people make different claims and have seen different visions and written different things and had different conversations also. But these, and we see it here in Scripture, these 12 men were given a direct calling. They were given the title apostle. Right? We'll later see, I believe this, that the apostle Paul, or Paul, Saul who became Paul, when we went through the book of Acts, we talked about how he became an apostle. I think we could group him in within these 12, as if when Judas betrayed the Lord, as mentioned here, his replacement ultimately would be, I believe, Paul as an apostle. but not to get off on rabbit trails. The idea is this progression here. Right? So these disciples, Jesus had these men had been around him, they'd been following him, been kind of pursuing it. Jesus had seen this, had observed these things, and he began to call them. And then we see a long list of names, and here's the honest truth. Some of these names we're very familiar with. Some of those names we know their backstory. Others of these disciples we know very little about. Here's kind of what we do know. Is when you look at this list of names, had they been read out loud in Jesus' day, there were no great heroes. There were no celebrities amongst this group. Really not most, but at least a third of these men were fishermen. They were blue collar guys. They were just everyday laborer type people. I love how as you look at this list and as we read it, like only one in that list, his occupation is given. And that's Matthew. We talked about this when we talked about when he called Matthew to follow him. You know, Matthew was a tax collector for all practical purpose. He had turned his back on his own people. He was a traitor. He was collecting taxes and by himself benefiting financially on behalf of the Roman Empire. Right? So he was a traitor. He would have been despised amongst the people. I also think it's interesting, like as Matthew includes his occupation, you know, you get down to towards the end of that list. Some of the disciples we have like guys we have more than one Simon, so there'll be another like Simon Peter mentioned at the beginning, but also I love here towards the end it talks about Simon the Zealot. Simon the Zealot came from a group of people. He was of a group of people who were ultra bound by heritage. They were the people that you know would die for country, would sacrifice their own family for country. They were the diehards of diehards when it came to nationalism. Simon the Zealot would have had some extreme tendencies to him. Could you imagine that dynamic within that group when you have Matthew the tax collector who had turned his back on his people, serving the Roman Empire, collecting taxes, now sitting at the same table with this nationalist zealot Simon? Like, could you imagine that dynamic? But what it begins to show us is this. The one unifying thing is Jesus. See, Jesus can bring all of those pieces together and create this picture of beauty, a picture of grace, a picture of rich community. These guys come from diverse backgrounds. Yet, the one thing that unifies them is Jesus. Listen, y'all, we live in a day and age where everything is ripe for division. I don't care what occupation you're in. I don't care what state you live in. We are ripe for division. We're in the midst of this, I don't even, another wave or what, I don't even know what to call it, of the COVID virus. And no matter where you stand on this thing, it can create a very divisive environment. In Florida here, we have a governor who's very anti like the masks and very pro open up state in businesses and all those kind of things. But yet, as I see him make statements about leaving whether a child wears a mask to school or not into the hands of the parent, you start seeing comments about how terrible that of a decision that is and how we need to do this. And then the flip side is if you see someone take a stance for wearing masks. They're bombarded with ridicule about how dumb that is, or whatever it is. It's just very divisive. But anything political is divisive, right? I mean, you have Republicans, you have Democrats, you have independents, you have conservatives, you have liberals, you have everything and anything. I mean, we live in a day and age where just gender itself is divisive. And so we live in a very divisive time. But what I love about this is the thing that can unite us, the only thing that will unite us, is Christ. And he took this very diverse group of men, picked them, chose them, different backgrounds, different personalities, and was able to create a very unified team. Now, were they perfect? No. Did they have struggles? Yes. Do we see arguments? Yes. They were people just like you and I. That's the beauty of this passage, is Jesus took everyday normal people and he was going to do great things in and through them. What a beautiful picture. But as I said before, understand this as we read those first few verses, understand like these were disciples, followers of him, that Jesus gave a title of apostle to. And with that new title, he gave them special powers, special authority. In essence, to be able to do the things that Jesus had been doing within his ministry, to heal the sick, to bring the dead back from life, to cast out demons. Now, that was not their primary purpose. That was not their primary calling. The primary calling they had was to deliver the message. The kingdom was at hand. We're going to see that in the next few verses. But understand that those guys, they were given these powers. The only reason they possessed those powers was because they came from the Lord. It was for them to do the ministry that Jesus wanted to do. So let's go ahead and read a little bit further about this ministry that he's calling them, this thing, this mission that he's going to give them. Starting in verse 5. So Matthew chapter 10, starting in verse 5, it says, these 12 Jesus sent out. So he's going to send these 12 guys out. They've been with him. They've been hanging out with him. They're going to obviously be with him throughout. As we read throughout the scripture, they're kind of with him. Sometimes the whole 12 are with him. Sometimes just within a group of that. But he's sending them out. He's preparing to send them out. So really from verse 5 through the end of the chapter, we're not going to read all the chapter today, but through the end of the chapter, these are instructions that Jesus is giving them in preparation for them to go out and do the mission that he's crafted for them. It says, instruct them, go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Verse 7 says, and proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. You received without paying, give without pay. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or tunics or sandals or staff, for the laborers deserve the food. Right, so in this next 5 verses, as Jesus begins to give them, after the calling, he begins to give them instruction in what their mission is, the scope of their mission. It's interesting because he tells them, it begins out with maybe what we would consider like a negative command, like do not do this, but from there he'll give you like the positive command, like this is what you need to do. This is the imperative thing. And so what he tells them is like, don't go to the Gentiles. Don't go to the Samaritans. Don't go to these other things. Like I want you laser focused in on. We're going to go to the Jews. We're going to go to Israel first. Now it's interesting because Jesus mentions there in that verse in verse 6, but rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now it's interesting. There is no nation of Israel at the time. Rome has occupied it, has taken it over. There is no Israel, yet Jesus is declaring them as Israel, right? And he's saying like there's these lost sheep. Remember we talked about that last time, end of Matthew chapter 9, right? Like the leadership, the scribes, the Pharisees, the priests had led these people astray. So you have all these wandering sheep. And so he's like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to be laser focused. You are going to be in a similar fashion to John the Baptist. You're going to be forerunners for me. Jesus, as he realized and knew, like he had a limited time on earth for his own ministry, and he was going to continue to do what we read about in chapters 8 and 9. He's going to continue to go and to teach and preach, and he's going to continue to heal, all those kind of things. But what he was going to use these disciples that he had spent time with and already began to train up and poured into, he was going to use these 12 to go out before him and kind of get things ready and prepared, and Jesus would follow behind. And he wants them to begin. Now, here's the deal. Like, this is, again, they're given a unique mission, a specific mission at this time. It doesn't stay this way. In fact, I think as we read there, the message that he was supposed to give, the unique, the special message was that they were to proclaim the kingdom of heaven is at hand. In essence, they're supposed to go and they're supposed to first preach, then do the other acts of compassion. But ultimately, they're emulating what Jesus had been doing. They're delivering the same message that Jesus had been delivering. Jesus didn't tell them to go out and create these new messages, go out and create these new sermons. No, he's saying you stick to the script, you stick to what we've been saying. You emulate those things. Like the message is that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, and that's what they were to do. There was a message: was you preach the kingdom of heaven at hand. Then you use these special powers and authorities that I've given to you.